There is a particular kind of man who only understands the value of what he had after it is completely, permanently, and irrevocably gone. Not after a fight, not after a rough patch, after the door has closed, after the papers have been signed, after the woman he dismissed, doubted, and discarded has built an entire life with someone else. A better life, a bigger life. The kind of life he always told himself he would give her one day when the timing was right. That kind of man does not lose his wife in a single moment. He loses her in 100 small decisions, each one feeling reasonable at the time, each one feeling like the right call, until one morning he wakes up next to the wrong woman in a half-empty house and realizes that everything he threw away is sitting in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, raising children that are not his, next to a man who is worth more in a single afternoon than Ryan Mercer would earn in the next 30 years. This is the story of Ryan and Diane Mercer. It is a story about a marriage that was working until someone decided it should not. It is a story about a woman whose loyalty was mistaken for weakness, whose love was used as a weapon against her, and whose silence when it was all over turned out to be the most devastating response she could have possibly given. And it is a story about a man who realized far too late exactly what he had done. By the time this story is over, you are going to remember the name Crystal Owens, and you are going to understand exactly what a person is capable of when they want something badly enough and are patient enough to wait for it. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. We have people joining us from all across the country tonight, and we love knowing who is in the room. Type your city or your state below. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed to Betrayal Archive yet, hit that button right now and turn on your notifications. Because this story is one you are going to want to tell someone about before it is even finished. Here is what you need to know going in. Ryan and Diane Mercer were married for 6 years. They moved from Philadelphia to New York for Ryan's career. They were building something real. They had no children yet, but they were working on it. And Diane, by every account of the people who knew her, was a woman who would have been an extraordinary mother. Crystal Owens was Diane's high school friend. She was single. She was beautiful. The moment she walked back into Diane's life in New York, the clock on that marriage started counting down, and neither Ryan nor Diane heard a single tick. 3 questions are going to drive this story from beginning to end. How does a woman destroy her best friend's marriage from the inside without her best friend ever seeing it coming? What happens to a man when he realizes the story he believed was never true? And what does a woman like Diane do when the world that was taken from her comes back around, bigger, better, and completely out of reach for the man who let it go? Diane Mercer was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried herself with a particular combination of warmth and self-possession that most people spend a lifetime trying to learn and never quite manage. She had grown up in a close-knit neighborhood outside Philadelphia, the daughter of a schoolteacher mother and a father who ran a small construction business. She was not raised with money, but she was raised with standards about how you treat people, how you keep your word, how you show up for the ones you love even when it costs you something. Those standards were not a performance for Diane. They were simply the architecture of who she was. She was also, by any honest account, beautiful, not in the manufactured, high-maintenance way that requires 2 hours in front of a mirror every morning, but in the natural, uncontrived way that is somehow more unsettling to the people around her, because it costs her nothing. She did not need to try. She simply was. And their quality, that effortless, unself-conscious beauty, combined with genuine warmth and real intelligence, made her the kind of woman that other women either loved immediately or never fully trusted. Diane had met Ryan Mercer in her mid-20s at a work function in Philadelphia. He was charming and ambitious and funny in the easy, confident way of a man who has always been well-liked. He pursued her with a consistency that she found both flattering and reassuring, not desperate, just determined, and she said yes to the 3rd date, 5th, the 30th, and eventually to the ring he offered her on a December evening on the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, with snow just beginning to fall. She loved him. That is the most important thing to understand about Diane going into this story. She loved Ryan Mercer with the full, uncomplicated, real love that most people are lucky to experience once. She had no agenda. She had no backup plan. She was simply his wife, in the most complete sense of that word, and she intended to stay that way. What she did not know was that staying that way was about to become the most difficult thing she had ever attempted. And the person who was going to make it difficult was someone she considered one of her oldest friends. Ryan Mercer was not a bad man. That is one of the most important and most complicated things about this story. He was not cruel, not abusive, not the kind of husband who makes the evening news. He was something harder to make sense of and in some ways harder to forgive. He was a good man with a significant blind spot. He had grown up the youngest of three brothers in a working-class family in South Jersey, and he had spent his entire adult life working to put distance between himself and where he started. He was smart and driven and had built a genuinely impressive career in financial services, the kind of career that required him to move to New York when an opportunity came along that was too significant to turn down. Diane had agreed to the move without hesitation. That was who she was. She packed up their life in Philadelphia and followed him to a city she did not know because she believed in what they were building together and because that is what you do when you are fully committed to something. Ryan knew that. He appreciated it. He told her so. And for a long time, their life in New York was everything they had hoped it would be. A good apartment in Brooklyn. A social life that was slowly building. A marriage that by every visible measure was working. The problem with Ryan was not what he did when things were good. The problem was what happened when someone he trusted started telling him a different story about his wife. Because Ryan Mercer, for all his intelligence and all his ambition, had never fully learned the difference between someone who tells you what you want to hear and someone who tells you the truth. And Crystal Owens understood that about him from the very first conversation she ever had with him. She filed it away, and she used it. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever trusted someone's version of a person you already knew and let that version replace what you had seen with your own eyes? Not because you were stupid, but because the person telling you the story was someone you had no reason to doubt yet? Think about that honestly, because that is exactly the trap Ryan walked into, and the worst part is, he walked in willingly. Drop a comment and tell us, do you think Ryan was a victim in this story, or do you think he made his own choices? We want to know what you think. Crystal Owens had known Diane since they were 15 years old, sitting next to each other in a 10th grade English class in suburban Philadelphia. They had been close in the way that teenage girls are close, intensely, dramatically, sharing everything, and had stayed loosely in touch through the years that followed, the way old friends do when life takes them in different directions. Crystal had stayed in Philadelphia while Diane built her life, got married, and eventually moved to New York. They texted occasionally, liked each other's photos, had the occasional catch-up call that lasted longer than either of them planned. The friendship was warm but not current, the kind that lives on shared history rather than shared present. When Diane and Ryan moved to New York, Diane had reached out to Crystal on an impulse, the way you do when you are new somewhere and still building your social foundation, and discovered that Crystal had relocated to Manhattan 18 months earlier for reasons she described as a fresh start following the end of a long relationship. The coincidence felt like a gift. Diane invited her to dinner the following weekend, arrived at their Brooklyn apartment with wine, and the same easy warmth Diane remembered from 20 years ago, and within 2 hours it felt, to Diane, like no time had passed at all. She told Ryan afterward that she was so glad they had found each other again. Ryan, who had spent the evening watching Crystal be effortlessly charming, agreed. What neither of them understood yet was that Crystal had not stumbled into their lives by coincidence. She had positioned herself there, and she had a very clear idea of what she was going to do once she was in. Crystal Owens was, by any honest assessment, an extraordinarily attractive woman. She was the kind of beautiful that makes a room recalibrate when she enters it, tall, polished, the kind of put together that suggests both effort and inevitability. She had learned early that her appearance was a form of currency, and she had spent her adult life understanding exactly how to spend it. What she had not been able to acquire, despite that currency, was what Diane had, a genuinely good marriage to a genuinely decent man who was building something real. Crystal did not have that. She had a series of relationships that had not lasted, a social life that glittered but did not satisfy, and a particular relationship with Diane's life that had always contained, beneath the warmth and the old friendship, something that she had never fully named even to herself. She wanted what Diane had. Not because she loved Ryan Mercer, she did not, but because she wanted to be chosen. She wanted to be the one someone built a life around, and she had decided, somewhere in the months before Diane called her, that Ryan Mercer was going to be the man who did that. All she had to do was remove the woman who was already there. What Crystal did over the next several months was so precise and so patient that, laid out in sequence, it reads almost like a blueprint. She operated on 2 tracks simultaneously, with a consistency that should have been impossible to maintain and which she maintained without apparent effort. She was Diane's devoted, returning best friend. She was present, warm, attentive. She showed up for brunches and long walks, and the kind of afternoon conversations that women in their 30s have when they are being honest with each other about the difficulties of marriage and ambition and identity. Diane told her things, real things, private things, the ordinary frustrations of a good marriage that still has friction because all marriages have friction. She told Crystal about the times Ryan had been dismissive when she needed him present, about the arguments they had about starting a family and the different timelines they were quietly negotiating, about the fear she sometimes felt, deep and unspoken, that Ryan was more in love with the idea of a successful life than with the specific life they were actually building together. These were not confessions of a failing marriage. They were the honest admissions of a woman who trusted her friend completely and needed somewhere to put the ordinary weight of loving someone. Imperfectly. Crystal listened to all of it. She absorbed every word. And she took every single thing Diane told her in confidence and she carried it, carefully and deliberately, to Ryan. On track 2, Crystal was becoming a fixture in Ryan's life. Not obviously, not in ways that Diane could point to and name, but through a slow accumulation of presence and availability that over several months added up to something significant. She appeared at work events Ryan attended. Their industries overlapped enough to make this plausible. She reached out to him directly under the cover of coordinating things with Diane. She positioned herself as someone who cared about their marriage, who wanted them to be happy, who felt obligated, always, reluctantly, to share things with Ryan that she believed he deserved to know. And the things she shared were devastating precisely because they were rooted in truth. She took Diane's private admissions, the fears, the frustrations, the unguarded moments of doubt, and she reframed them for Ryan. She did not lie outright, she distorted. A fear Diane had expressed about Ryan's emotional availability became, in Crystal's retelling, evidence that Diane did not respect him. A frustration about family planning became, in Crystal's hands, a suggestion that Diane was not sure she wanted children with Ryan specifically. And the most private thing Diane had ever shared with Crystal, a conversation about a medical concern she had been quietly investigating. Something unresolved and still unclear. Crystal took that and turned it into a certainty. She told Ryan that Diane had confided in her, woman to woman, that she had been told she could not have children, that she had known this for some time, that she had been keeping it from him because she was afraid of what it would mean for their marriage. She delivered this with the expression of someone who hated to say it, who had wrestled with whether to say it, who was only saying it now because she cared about Ryan and felt he deserved the truth. Ryan sat with that information for 3 days, and then everything changed. I need to stop here for a moment because I want you to think about something. Ryan was told something devastating about his wife by someone he had come to trust, who framed it as coming from Diane herself. He never asked Diane directly. He never went to a doctor. He never said the words out loud to his wife and watched her face when she heard them. He just believed it. Have you ever made a major decision based on someone else's version of the truth without checking it with the source? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what Ryan did next changed 4 lives permanently. And he did it without asking his wife a single question. The shift in Ryan happened gradually and then all at once, the way most significant changes do. In the weeks following Crystal's revelation, he became distant in a way that Diane could feel but not explain. He was still present physically, performing the routines of their life together. But there was a withdrawal in him, a cooling of the particular warmth that had always been the foundation of their marriage, that Diane could sense, not being able to name. She asked him if something was wrong. He said no. She asked if it was work. He said he was just tired. She sat with the unease and told herself she was overthinking it, that marriages have rhythms, that this would pass. It did not pass. It deepened. And Crystal, who was watching all of it with the careful attention of someone managing a long game, began the second phase of her campaign. She started telling Diane things about Ryan. Not lies, exactly, but shaped truths, the same technique she had used in reverse. She told Diane she had heard something at a work event, something she was not sure what to make of, something about Ryan and a woman from his office. She said she was probably wrong and she did not want to cause trouble, and maybe Diane should not mention that she had said anything. She watched Diane process it, she watched the seed take root, and then she stepped back and let the damage spread on its own. Within 2 months of Crystal's arrival in their lives as a genuine presence, rather than a casual acquaintance, the Mercer marriage was in trouble that neither Ryan nor Diane fully understood. They were fighting about things that had never been issues before. There was a coldness between them that neither of them had created, but both of them were now maintaining, each one waiting for the other to explain what had gone wrong. Neither one having any idea that the explanation was sitting in both of their phones under the name of someone they both trusted. Diane, who was not a woman who fell apart easily, began to feel something she had never felt in their marriage before. The particular loneliness of being in a relationship with someone who has already begun to leave, even though they are still in the room. She reached out to Crystal during this period more than she reached out to anyone. Crystal was there every time, warm, present, devastated on Diane's behalf, full of the right words at the right moments. Diane told people later that Crystal was the only thing holding her together during those months. She meant it completely. She had no way of knowing that Crystal was the only thing taking her apart. Ryan asked for a divorce on a Tuesday evening in November, 18 months after Crystal had walked back into their lives. He did not give Diane a detailed explanation. He said he felt like they had grown apart, that he was not sure the marriage was working anymore, that he thought they both deserved to be with people who were right for them. He did not mention children. He did not mention Crystal. He said the things that people say when they have decided on an ending and have not yet found the honest words to describe the real reason. Diane sat across from him at their kitchen table in Brooklyn and listened to all of it without crying. She asked him once if there was someone else. He said no. She did not ask again. She did not argue, did not plead, did not give him the dramatic scene that might have at least explained to her own nervous system what was happening. She simply sat in the silence for a long moment after he finished speaking, nodded once, and said she would call a lawyer in the morning. Ryan, who had prepared himself for something harder, was almost unsettled by how calm she was. He would think about that calm for a long time afterward. He would eventually understand that it was not the calm of someone who did not care. It was the calm of someone who had already understood, on some level, that something had been broken in a way she could not fix, and who had decided that dignity was the only thing left worth protecting. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Diane kept most of what was hers. Ryan kept the apartment and a significant portion of debt that came with it. They divided their shared life with the careful, impersonal efficiency of two people who are both moving as fast as possible toward an exit. Crystal, during this period, has maintained her role as Diane's most devoted support system with a consistency that, in retrospect, is almost impressive in its audacity. She sat with Diane through the paperwork. She helped her find a new apartment in Manhattan. She held her hand through the worst nights. And all the while, she was quietly, steadily deepening her connection with Ryan, moving from concerned mutual friend to something that, by the time the divorce was final, was already something else entirely. Ryan told himself it was not what it looked like. He told himself it had happened naturally. He told himself that the feelings had developed after the decision to divorce had already been made, and that therefore no line had been crossed. He told himself a great many things during that period, and he believed most of them, because believing them was significantly more comfortable than the alternative. Here is a question for the men watching this tonight specifically. Ryan convinced himself he had not done anything wrong because the timeline in his head had the feelings coming after the decision. But the decision came from information Crystal had given him, which means Crystal's plan was already working before he ever knew there was a plan. Have you ever been manipulated into making a decision that felt entirely like your own, where someone arranged the circumstances and let you believe you were choosing freely? Comment below. This is one of the most important questions this story asks, and we genuinely want to hear your thoughts. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Ryan and Crystal made their relationship public. They did not announce it dramatically. They simply began appearing together in the way that people do when they have stopped pretending to be something other than what they are. The reaction among the people who knew both of them ranged from uncomfortable silence to barely concealed shock. Several of Diane's friends cut Crystal off immediately and without explanation. Others, who had watched Crystal perform her role as devoted support system throughout the divorce, found themselves confused, unsure whether what they were seeing was a betrayal or simply a consequence of two people finding each other in the aftermath of a failed marriage. Crystal handled all of it with the particular grace of someone who has rehearsed their response to this moment. She expressed appropriate discomfort about the optics. She acknowledged that the timing was not ideal. She was careful and measured and gave nothing away. She had, after all, been careful and measured and given nothing away for the better part of 2 years. This was simply the final act of a performance she had been delivering since the day she walked back into Diane's life with a bottle of wine and a warm smile and a very clear plan. Ryan, watching Crystal handle the social fallout with such composure, found himself admiring it. He told himself he had chosen well, that he had found someone who was strong and self-possessed and capable of navigating difficult things without falling apart. He was not wrong about any of those qualities. He simply did not yet understand what they had been used for. Within a year of the divorce, Ryan proposed to Crystal at a rooftop restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. Crystal said yes before he had finished the question. She moved into the Brooklyn apartment, the same apartment where Ryan and Diane had built their life together, and began the process of making it. She redecorated with a thoroughness that left very little evidence of what the space had been before. She removed photographs. She rearranged furniture. She replaced things that had been chosen together with things that had been chosen alone. Ryan watched all of it and told himself it was a fresh start, that a new chapter deserved a new environment, that the past was the past, and the future was standing in front of him in a new set of curtains that cost more than his first month's rent had. And for a while, for a meaningful while, he was happy. Crystal was everything she had promised to be. Attentive, engaged, beautiful in the particular way that had made Ryan notice her from the very first evening she had sat across from him in this same apartment with a different woman beside her. He had what he had traded for. He was going to enjoy it. What Ryan did not know, because he was no longer the person Diane spoke to about the things that mattered, was what was happening on the other side of the divorce. He had a version of Diane's life that Crystal had curated for him over 2 years. The version in which Diane was quietly falling apart, struggling to adjust, finding her footing slowly and with difficulty. That version was wrong. Diane Mercer, in the 12 months following the end of her marriage, did something that people who did not know her well found surprising, and people who knew her well found entirely consistent with who she had always been. She got up every morning and she built something. She threw herself into her career with the particular focus of someone who has lost something significant and has decided that the only productive response is forward motion. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job, in the quiet, competent way of someone who does not need external validation to know their own worth. And without the emotional weight of a deteriorating marriage taking up space in her head, she became exceptional at it. She got a promotion within 8 months of the divorce. She moved into a better apartment. She rebuilt her social life without Crystal in it, because Crystal had made her choice, and Diane was under no obligation to pretend otherwise, and she found that the friendships she formed in the absence of Crystal's influence were warmer and more genuine than most of what she had been experiencing for the previous 2 years. She was not fine immediately. She was not fine for a while, but she was moving. And Diane moving, it would turn out, led somewhere that nobody, not Crystal, not Ryan, and perhaps not even Diane herself, had anticipated. Victor Calloway was Ryan Mercer's boss. He was also Diane's ex-boyfriend from her early 20s. They had dated for 2 years before life, and timing had pulled them in different directions. Victor toward the accelerating trajectory of a business career that would eventually make him one of the wealthier men in New York, and Diane toward the life she had built with Ryan. They had ended things without bitterness, the way you end things when nothing is actually wrong except the circumstances. Victor had never fully stopped thinking about her. Diane had thought about him occasionally, in the way you think about a chapter of your life that was genuinely good, with warmth and without regret, and with no expectation of return. When Victor heard through a professional contact that Diane Mercer was the same woman as Ryan Mercer's ex-wife, he sat with that information for a week before he did anything with it. Then he called her. Diane and Victor had coffee first, then dinner, then several dinners. Then, over the course of a year that moved both slowly and quickly in the way that years do when something real is building, they became something that neither of them had entirely planned, but both of them had, in some part of themselves they had not fully acknowledged, been hoping for. Victor Calloway was not an easy man in the ways that very successful people are often not easy. He was exacting and demanding and had opinions about everything and very little patience for things done poorly. But with Diane, he was something that the people who knew him professionally would have found almost unrecognizable. He was patient. He was present. He listened in the particular way of a man who understands that the woman in front of him is worth listening to. And he was, from the very beginning of their rebuilt relationship, completely honest with her in a way that Ryan Mercer for all his good qualities, had never quite managed. Diane fell in love with him the second time with the particular clarity of someone who knows, this time, exactly what they are saying yes to. They were married 18 months after that first phone call. The wedding was small and private and exactly what Diane wanted. They moved into Victor's apartment on the Upper East Side, the kind of apartment that exists in a different category from the Brooklyn apartment where Diane had lived the previous chapter of her life. Not just in size or location, but in what it represented. It represented arrival. It represented the life she had always deserved and had never stopped working toward, even when someone was quietly working to prevent it. And then, 14 months after the wedding, Diane became pregnant. The pregnancy was healthy. The delivery was uncomplicated. The child was beautiful, and the doctor who had followed Diane throughout her prenatal care, reviewing her complete medical history, noted something significant and shared it with her privately. Diane had never been told she was unable to have children. She had never received a diagnosis of that kind. Her fertility, as far as her complete medical record was concerned, had never been in question at any point in her life. She had simply never been pregnant before, because she had been married to a man whose own fertility issues, documented in a medical record he had never shared with her, and had perhaps not fully confronted himself, had made pregnancy during their marriage a biological impossibility that had nothing to do with Diane. The lie Crystal had told Ryan, the lie about Diane being barren, the lie she had presented as a confidence shared between women, was not just a cruelty. It was not even true. It had been constructed entirely from nothing, delivered as a fatal wound to a marriage that had no idea it was being operated on. And it had worked precisely because Ryan had never asked Diane directly whether it was true. The way the truth reached Ryan was not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no revelation delivered face to face, no scene that allowed anyone to process their feelings in real time. It arrived the way most devastating truths arrive in the modern world, through a third party, through a conversation that was never meant to reach him, through the particular way that information moves in circles where people know each other in overlapping ways. A colleague of Ryan's, who knew Victor Calloway professionally and had attended a function where Diane had been present, mentioned in passing, casually, without any awareness of what he was handing Ryan, that Calloway's wife had recently had their second child. Ryan already knew Diane had married Victor. He had known that for a while and had processed it, or told himself he had processed it, as the natural next chapter of her life. What he had not known was that she had children, and when his colleague, filling silence with the comfortable details of other people's lives, mentioned that apparently the doctors had also discovered something interesting about the previous marriage. He went home that evening and sat in the apartment that used to be his and Diane's and is now his and Crystal's, and he thought about what he had been 3 years ago by the woman currently sleeping in the next room. He thought about the certainty with which Crystal had delivered that information. He thought about the medical record he had never asked to see. He thought about the conversation he had never had with his wife, the direct, honest, married people conversation in which he could have simply asked her the question and heard the truth from the person it was actually about. He sat with all of it for a very long time in a very quiet apartment. And for the first time since Crystal Owens had walked back into his life with a bottle of wine and a warm smile, Ryan Mercer understood exactly what had happened to him. The confrontation with Crystal was not what Ryan had expected it to be. He had expected her to deny it. She did not deny it exactly. She deflected. She recontextualized. She reminded him that their marriage had had other problems, that the information about Diane had not been the only reason things had fallen apart, that relationships are complicated, and it was not fair to reduce everything to a single conversation from years ago. She was calm and measured and gave nothing away. She was, in other words, exactly the same person she had always been, performing composure under pressure with a skill that Ryan now found not admirable but terrifying. He understood, sitting across from her in the apartment that used to hold a different life, that he had never actually known this woman. He had known the version of herself she had presented to him, and that version had been constructed with a single purpose in mind, to get what she wanted. She had gotten it. She had simply not anticipated that getting it would eventually include the particular discovery that made the foundation of it impossible to pretend. The marriage between Ryan and Crystal lasted 4 years. They had no children together, a fact that carried its own particular irony, given the lie that had been its cornerstone. In the final year of the marriage, Crystal had grown distant in ways that Ryan recognized with a cold and hollow familiarity, because he had seen that exact pattern before from the other side. She was less present. She was harder to reach. There was a man, a detail that emerged late and quickly, and which Ryan did not pursue with any great energy, because by the time he learned of it, he was not sure he had the standing to be outraged about anything. The divorce from Crystal was nothing like the divorce from Diane. Diane had been measured and dignified, and had taken what was hers and left with her head high. Crystal's attorneys arrived with the particular precision of people who had been preparing for this possibility for some time. The settlement was significant, half the apartment's equity, a substantial portion of their shared financial accounts, legal fees that took another meaningful slice. Ryan Mercer emerged from his second divorce considerably less than he had entered it, financially, professionally, and in every other way that can be measured and several that cannot. He was not a broken man, but he was a diminished one, and the particular quality of his diminishment, the specific shape of the losses and the specific way they had accumulated, could be traced, with a directness that did not require much effort, back to a single evening 3 years earlier when a woman he should never have trusted had sat across from him and told him something about his wife. That he should have asked his wife. He thought about Diane often in the years that followed. Not with the fantasy of reconciliation, he understood, without having to be told that that door did not exist anymore. Victor Calloway was a better man for her than he had been, and the life she was living was the life she deserved. And Ryan was clear-eyed enough about all of it to acknowledge that without requiring anyone to confirm it. What he thought about was not the future he had lost, but the specific choices he had made that had created its absence. Evening he had sat with Crystal's information and chosen to believe it without checking. The Tuesday in November, when he had asked Diane for a divorce across their kitchen table and watched her absorb it with a dignity he had not deserved. The night he had sat in that same kitchen after his second divorce was finalized, alone, and understood with the complete and irrevocable clarity that arrives only when it is too late to do anything with it, that the best thing that had ever happened to him had been sitting across from him at that table for 6 years, and he had traded it for a beautiful lie. And the lie had cost him everything. This story does not end with justice in the courtroom sense. Crystal Owens faced no formal consequence for what she did. She moved on with half of Ryan's money, and whatever came next in a life that had been built on the wreckage of other people's trust. Ryan Mercer lives with the full weight of the choices he made, which is its own form of justice and its own form of sentence. And Diane is on the Upper East Side with Victor Calloway and their children, and a life that is full in every way that the previous chapter was. She did not win. That is not the right word. She simply continued being who she had always been. A woman of genuine worth who trusted the wrong person and survived it and built something extraordinary on the other side of the survival. That is not winning. That is simply what happens when a person with real character meets a circumstance that tries to take it from them and refuses to let it go. The question this story leaves all of us with is not about Crystal or Ryan or even Diane. It is about the choices we make when someone we trust tells us something about someone we love. It is about the difference between information and truth, and the particular danger of treating one as the other without doing the work to check. Ryan Mercer lost his marriage not because it was failing. He lost it because someone handed him a story, and he believed the story without asking the person the story was about. That is a mistake that does not require a Crystal Owens to make. It only requires a moment of weakness, a person you trust more than you should, and a question you chose not to ask. How many of those moments have passed in your own life without you noticing? And how many of them are still ahead? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which part of this story hit you the hardest. Tell us where you are watching from tonight. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Betrayal Archive, because every story on this channel is real, every person in it paid a real price, and the next one is already coming. You do not want to miss it.